After finally securing an audience with life, the first thing it said to him when they met was, "Whatever you have to say to me, above all, be blunt and to the point." And the man turned and walked away. Much to life's delight. Those who say that they get 8 hours of sleep a day are leaving out a lot. One man who strove to be original took this survey. We're all born in the same manner, so the only thing left is to die in a creative fashion, which perforce dictates that it must be done while you're still alive. Reflected he most strenuously. While habit is the instinctive defender of the body, all it does for the mind is to keep it sane by collective definition. What a bloody waste, mused Milton. The situation in life's common train station is such that men can hear departures other than their own being announced, as long as the destinations don't sound too distant from their own. Knock, knock. How do you know that a conscious man has had to partially lie to you? Answer, he's talked to you. Those who believe that enlightenment is from the inside out still do not realize that for components in a system, man and life, there is no outside. The Romans didn't execute Jesus for being redundant, but because he calls them to be and to notice it. The reason Adam didn't step on the snake's head in the first place was because it asked him twice not to. The reason men like to tell certain old stories over and over again is because in doing so it eventually wrings from them any disturbing potential. Just the opposite, you might note, of why they believe they do. Believe they do. Everyone is born drifting downstream on an inner tube, and only the unusual, people just asking for it, will slide off and try to stand up in the water. Hey, who do you think you are? And what do you think you're doing? The simple, when stumped, will play dumb so as to pass for intelligent, which itself seems a pretty clever move on their part. That is, if they had been the ones who thought of it. Of course, the most common use by men of declaring their ignorance in some particular instance is to show what an ordinary kind of guy they are. Just part of the crowd. One guy says, if I could feel better, I could think better, which has a grain of reality to it, though not enough to be of any use. One man tried every way possible to get to Brazil, except to just go directly there. In the routine world, if you can count to 2, you can count to 2 trillion. In fact, if you can, then it's not even necessary. No matter how conscious the herd may become, it can never rise above hoof level. The cry of the common man, I am stuck here, and I love it. A kid asked his mother, can I go outside? And she thought, now there's something I'd like to see. Men do not truly want to be cured of their common mortal ills for the same reason they don't like art that is too original and unexpected. On his tombstone, one man had writ, I was born me, and by God I died me. And what more could you ask, noted an adjacent daffodil. Every day one man would write down everything he knew so that he could burn it at bedtime. Men are able to take education to be intelligent by making it an ongoing process. None can find fault with Rio who've not been there. Oh, I get it. I think. Consciousness is not fully realized if you are too conscious of yourself or just barely so. Almost anyone who will sit still for a few minutes knows what a mystic is talking about, which is why they won't sit still. Most Indians only recognize smoke signals from their own tribe. Or maybe that's everybody and hand gestures. Well, anyway, you know what I mean. Without knowing a tree from the inside out, you can never understand its bark. In the general train station of life, even if you don't physically go anywhere, you can still take trips just through naps. One guy adopted himself a motto: if you don't earn nothing, you can't be broke. And if you don't learn anything, you can't be dumb. Or maybe it adopted him. The reason that so much art sucks is because so many artists do art to get attention and approval rather than be creative and original. In one land, a llama responding to another llama's spitting by spitting back in a thoughtful appearing kind of way is seen as evidence of intelligence. Believe it or swallow deeply. All drugs, religions, and philosophies start out as attempts to short-circuit existing wiring systems. But alas, as days pass in the station, men's ears soon translate any exotic-sounding departures into their old one. Inside a grave is a cold place, if you're in there with someone else. Everyone's born a twin, but then one of them disappears. Either that or you lose part of your vision. On one planet, they put the moral to a story first and then tell the story. What kind of world is that? And what the hell are they up to? An artist took umbrage at the accusation. Why can't art be negative and whiny? The news is, and everybody accepts it. Tut tut, admonished Senor Bartle. Never change professions in the middle of a stream. Don't you mean metaphors? Responded Trigger. On one world was a secret society which kept being rediscovered, thus had to keep re-secreting itself. This is to be confused with the mind continually believing that it has caught up with what consciousness understands. Intelligence and the collective. A cow in a herd, even if surrounded by Einstein bovines, is still a cow. The problem is not that a prophet is never appreciated in his own hometown, but rather that you'll never become a visionary if you stay where you are. The reason that social climbing is so common among the ordinary is because even they don't want to associate with themselves. Once you see what's going on and get past the initial stage of excitement, it's almost annoying how blind men are, which has to become your little joke. There was once a mystical order that went by the name of Don't Stay Put. The only secret knowledge of value is knowledge that you don't now have and never catch up to. Once a conscious man gets to Wednesday is a waste of time. According to one quite ancient legend, the very first mystical school on this planet called itself Our Little Joke. Why things are as they are. If everyone would straighten up back when they still had the chance, then they would never get in the fix they're in now, so they could wish they'd have straightened up back when they had the chance. truth, hormones, and political campaigning. Those who enjoy the seeking of office lack the true quality of leadership. In the land of the conscious, there are no reruns. Once the king finally achieved the state of comprehending what rulership entailed, instead of a 21-gun salute whenever he appeared, or attempted to appear, he directed to be shot at 21 times or more. Does not matter whether a conscious man goes by way of murder or by suicide, just as long as he only goes once. Your Honor, may I ask the court one more question? You may if you won't, but by so doing, your fate is sealed. In one world, the ability to cleverly ridicule others is taken as a sign of intelligence. There be some weird places in this universe. The road to awareness should be daily paved with new discoveries. And for those in a rush may ignore the above word, should. The reason linguists can't decide what was the first word ever spoken by man is because there wasn't one, but two. When are you going to get that through your head? Said Perseus to Medusa. Or maybe it was Dr. Johnson. In the land of the conscious, there are no rewrites. One reason some are never recognized. A father reminded his son, all honors from your peers are cow awards. They didn't drive Confucius from the kingdom for stampeding the whole herd, but for making too many individuals sense a bucket beneath them. Halt! Who goes there? Well, sure as hell not me, said Lao. In the land of the conscious, the cry of look sharp has nothing to do with fashion. As originally constructed, the walls of every king's castle are either too thick or else too thin. How are you going to win? How are you going to win? I could give you a hint, but first you got to get out of there. If a conscious man answers the same question twice, he's humoring you. One reason it's so hard to locate the road to enlightenment is because it's being continually paved over, almost with every use. In the land of the conscious, there are no second printings. On every mystical expedition, someone's responsible for recording its history. In the beginning, they fight for the job and eventually struggle to keep from having to take it. A passenger stopped the conductor and asked, "How will I know when the train has finally reached its destination?" And the conductor grabbed him and shook him vigorously as he shouted, "Wake up, sir! Wake up!" No optimist is correct who tells others of his view. The matter of solutions and the exceptionally endowed. Conscious attention to most problems are more than they can stand. The head of one mystical order one day told the troops, "It might interest you to know," I almost said, encourage you, har, har, har. Interest you to know that among the more conscious, it's not possible to lose your mind. It's already too late for that. Har, har, har. What fox worth a whip continues to chase a rabbit once he's caught it? In the furthermost outpost in the land of pure consciousness is found no commentary on previous commentary, no analysis of past analysis, no compounding the crime of speech. And little Richard shouted, "Shut up, fool!" And many were sorely surprised, having never imagined he was a mystic. See if we can wrap up some of you people's hair. Some of the things we've been talking about recently. Picture a scene. a quite ordinary person has worked his way up from the middle of the parade, just the middle socio-economic ranks of life. Ordinary man, ordinary position. But he's worked himself by his own hands up to the point that he is now a man of extreme wealth. And as is always the rule, already, even though this scene is going to play out, and I'm sure has happened, I can assure you, but already try and listen, with your one right literal ear and your other metaphorical ear. As is most common for those who are part of the flourish, after he is sufficiently moneyfied, he then seeks social status, which requires that he be accepted by the old line rich, those who did not work for their money. You're rich, but you're not socially acceptable. The historic, most common way to seek entree into the real social ranks, after you once had sufficient funds to live a life of the socially prominent, if you can be accepted. One of the most common ways is the acquisition of art. So now picture my little person, my little man. He has absolutely worked himself up from just middle class into the ranks of the extremely wealthy, even bought himself a house in the right area. But as again is the rule, common rule, just because he now has a house next to the Rockefellers or the Mellons or the DuPonts doesn't mean that they're going to associate with him. And so he waits around for several years, keep waiting that they're going to come over and introduce themselves and bring him a bundt cake and welcome to the neighborhood. And they show no signs of even acknowledging his existence. Either on his own, it seems to be part of the general wiring system, he will come upon it, or else somebody will suggest that he take up art. It can stumble around for a while of him trying to becoming a patron of the arts, subscribing, underwriting, acquisitions of a local museum, etc. But let's get it down to this point. He finally begins, it seems like that the real way, somebody suggests or he stumbles upon the possibility of him actually personally becoming an acquirer of art, real art. And so the man goes out and let's say he acquires a Van Gogh, his first real piece, does a little research or he pays somebody to advise him. Then he sends out, he has hand delivered by his butler to the adjoining mansions. He has hand delivered invitations saying that he has, it would be his privilege, would they attend a dinner, cocktail party, at such and such date, at which time not only would he look forward to their social company, but he thinks as fellow lovers of the arts, fine arts, that they will be most interested, that it's going to be actually a celebration because of his acquisition of a very seldom seen work by a major French impressionist. I'm giving him enough sense that he didn't come out and say it, but sort of titillate. So at any rate, the night comes and his neighbors show up. It's all full tux and evening gowns. They have a little cocktail, and he finally meets them in person, and there's this, down at the far wall, this covering. It's obviously a painting. There's a light hanging up, but it's covered. And so everyone knows that's the only reason they showed up. And he drags out a while, and so perhaps they have dinner. And up to this point, everybody's going along with him and acting rather social, just wanting to see what happens. So at the end, he gets up, and they have the champagne, the cigars, and the brandy, and he says, the time comes, I know you're all waiting. So he undrapes it, and it's a Van Gogh that none of them had ever seen. And he even says, I acquired this through a dealer in Budapest. I've always been interested in the French Impressionists. And as a matter of fact, this particular painting, whatever the name of it was, is very seldom even mentioned in the Van Gogh catalogs. And in fact, the dealer assured me that this was the first time he had ever seen the painting in person. There was not even a color photograph of it available. And the people looked and they, and within minutes, the man, I'm not drawing this out too much, let's say he gives even a little more history of it and points out how seldom, that it's just almost an unknown, other than the painter saying, other than the dealer in Budapest saying that he had heard rumors of the painting, and that he had met people who swore they had seen it, that there's actually no representation of it, not even, I said, a color photograph. There's no photograph, only rumor, and etc. And here it is, and he has acquired it. So within a short period of time, a little more champagne, he is now, the DuPonts, the Mellons, his social, what he wanted to be his social peers, are now around him, and not just being perfunctorily sociable to him. They are now, the whole atmosphere has changed, you understand. And they're now coming up, and people are almost touching him, almost touching his elbow and saying, well, what taste he has, and how much their circle still approves of the French Impressionists, that many of us feel that was the apex of Western art, probably never to be surpassed. Anyway, now he is part of the crowd. And let's say from the kitchen, peeks out one of the maids, one of the girls serving, and she's invited her boyfriend. Well, he's just round in the back, he's hanging around the kitchen, and he looks out there. Well, they're just peeking through the door, watching it all, and he looks, and it just so happens he's an artist, and it just so happens he is, I assume all of you know, it's a huge industry of fake art. It's a great fraud. It's supposedly one of the biggest frauds now internationally in the world. And he looks up and realizes, it's been several years, but he does this for a living. He realizes that that's one of his works, that Van Gogh. Now we're not there yet. Hold your action. But at any rate, so I want you to get the full scene. There it is. And he looks up, and that really covers all, but he even mentions to his girlfriend, I just realized that's when I painted and I sold that guy that buys most of my stuff in London, and anyway, kind of a coincidence. Here it is, but that's mine. The man paid, by the way. He finally lets out. Someone asked, well, he finally mentioned, but let's say he paid $12 million for it. And it was painted by his maid, one of his, what do you call him, I guess maid, one of his maid's boyfriends. Let's say the boyfriend may even mention that he only got $1,000 for it to that dealer, which is about what he normally gets. He can knock off one in about 3 hours. But he got $1,000, and so he looks, and he even overhears that the man paid $12 million for it. He knocked it off back in his garage, 2 or 3 hours, and he sold it for $1,000. This guy, in fact, who'd been sitting around, this man, this billionaire right now, could have bought that thing from him for $1,000, but he paid $12 million for it. Now, the question is this, to really get going. You've got the scene, and there's nothing, all of this actually happens, and so far there's no criticism, there's no point to it yet. I just want you to understand this thing happens. But here's the man, and up to the point I'm taking the story, he has succeeded at what he wanted to accomplish, my billionaire. He could afford $12 million for a painting. And there he stands. We're still within less than an hour of his revealing of the painting, the reaction, how times have changed, and now the people that he has, for so many years had sought to impress were now treating him truly as an equal. Even though they had been there at his house for several hours before he unveiled the painting, and they had just been sociable, but it was obvious they were there out of curiosity. But they were not treating him. They were treating him almost like a stranger. They were just being mechanically polite. But no one was really giving him any sincere attention. Or as they say in the upper classes, he was not getting no quality time from them people. But now, less than an hour, the whole situation has changed, and what he had been seriously, deeply, sincerely seeking, after he made his fortune, he had made enough money, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, that he could never spend it all. He was just richer than he could even, the calculations weren't even pertinent. And yet, for 5 or 10 years, he was still dissatisfied. He had accomplished what he first wanted, but he's certainly not going back and associate with the people he used to. It's just the whole thing. And he could not seem, by any trick, by any means, to gain the respect, to gain entree into what he always wanted to feel was his peer group. The real upper class, the old moneyed. But here it is. It cost him $12 million, which he would have spent years ago, but he didn't know what to do. And it took him 10 years to stumble around, and he spent $12 million, and now, within minutes, he seemed to accomplish it. Now remember, but he paid $12 million for a forgery. It is not what he thought. It is not what anybody in the room thinks. Is it a forgery? What difference does it make? Let's have a little quality, quiet time and ponder for a second. And it's not just one answer should pop to mind, but consider, in fact, if you're getting good at this, not necessarily an answer jumps, but that you consciously, without the total reliance on words, that you can picture the whole scene. And not just the scene where he is, but a larger segment inside the dynamic structure of life itself. That here's a man that from one real view, was a victim of a horrendous swindle. He paid $12 million for something that he could have purchased for $1,000. Of course, no one would pay $1,000 that knew it was a fake. But he could have. And yet there he stands beaming, the high point of his life. Maybe 60 years old, and this is the finest moment. If you grabbed him right now, he would say, yes, this is it right now. Let me get back to him. That there he stands in front of his $12 million Van Gogh. And all of these, Mellons, Rockefellers, Kennedys, Rothschilds, they're all staying around him, and he is now one of them. Is the painting a fake? It's right behind him, and I've already told you it's a fake. But is it a fake? Or my other version, what difference does it make? Right? This is really sort of a side little step to it. Such as in art. Everyone, if I must point out the obvious, people don't normally seem to think about it, but you do understand, even if it was a real Van Gogh, it intrinsically cannot be worth $12 million. I mean, I don't know what canvas, the finest piece of canvas, how much can actually be in the materials of a Van Gogh, of any painting. I don't even know, $50? Tops? So in anything, if it was a real Van Gogh, you know it's not worth, not in the sense of worth $12 million intrinsically, it's worth $12 million if it was. Let's say it was a real one and went up on auction somewhere and it was bidding between rational, sane people. And it gets up to $12 million there in the auction room. Then that was what it was worth to somebody. But it was not intrinsically worth $12 million. It was intrinsically worth maybe 50 or 100. So, and this will be pertinent in a minute what I'm getting to. And so there it is. And people continually, some of the most powerful people on this planet, of course, if you don't have that kind of money, it's easy to laugh and say, what kind of idiot would pay $12 million for a $50 piece of canvas stretched over $2 worth of wood framing and a guy, painted? Of course, a Van Gogh, maybe I stretched it. If we set up a Picasso or the Kooning or somebody that you'd look at and go, well, crap, a kid could throw paint on there. It's not worth anything. And some idiot paid $40 million for that, except it turns out the idiot owns the company that you work for. He owns half the eastern part of the United States. That's the idiot that paid $40 million for this. So it really makes no sense, right? But back to my scene. You might still hold that over in one corner where... But back to my scene. You've had a little time. You do catch some of the conflicting dynamics at work. The man purchased something that had no intrinsic value resembling what he paid for it to begin with. Had it been legitimately what it was represented to be, had it been a true Van Gogh, there is nothing resembling its intrinsic worth approaching $12 million. There's that. He paid $12 million for it, however. And remember, I'm just adding, this is not in any particular sequence. This is all extant. This is all part of what is going on in life simultaneously. So if it had been real, its intrinsic value at most would have been 50 or 60 bucks. But he paid 12 million. All right, let's just shift a little bit. There are circumstances, there are other scenes back to my auction house. Had it been real, there would have been sane people bidding who would have paid $12 million for it. And so, non-intrinsically speaking, to somebody, more than somebody, to groups of people, that piece of canvas could be worth $12 million. In this case, it was not real. It was a fraud. He was cheated. And yet the purpose for which he purchased the painting has not been lost. Not thus far. Not as far as I've taken the story, which they may never find out. But what he wanted to accomplish has been accomplished, but by a fraud in which he was not even a part. He has been defrauded. Of course, you could say the other people have been second order defrauded, but he's been defrauded and he's delighted. Now the question again, what difference does it make? Can anyone now take this story instead of a Van Gogh and a man who bought it, paid an exorbitant price for it? It's a fake, as we know. He does not know it, but he paid that, but it's a fake. I'm going to make sure that you've got this. There he stands, and the thing behind him is a fraud, this painting. And he's standing there smiling, and now he's got what he's wanted from it, but he's standing in front of a fraud. He didn't know it, which would change a little bit, but understand, he has garnered now the respect, the acceptance of these people, but he's done so through a fraud of which he's unaware. But that does not change the damn fact that that thing is a fraud. And there he stands, reaping the benefits, as he calls them. I'm not questioning it. He's getting what he wanted. Can anyone now see that fake Van Gogh, let us say, metaphorically speaking, as a human mind? About the only difference is you didn't have to pay for it. But can you see that there stands every person on this planet, sane, ordinary people, and you're in front of this, to keep my metaphor going, in front of this, to you, impressive acquisition, this impressive piece of art. Me. Of course, you say me, if we're getting anywhere above the most crude red circuit people, it's not just their body going, look at me, but to me, in the social context, is mind, personality, but it's a person's mind. That the acquisition of Van Gogh represents not just wealth. It represents, and it's not just strength. He could pick up the painting and carry it. And he had the money to buy it. But these people whom he wanted to impress, they know lots of other people. The world's full of people that could afford to pay $12 million for a painting. But the world is not full of those who are welcome at the Rothschild residence. So it's not just a matter of strength. It's not just a matter of money. What it showed was, what it represented was his mind. that he had the taste, which is strictly mental. Because nobody's body looks at a painting and goes, God, how much could we get that for? What it represented, his acquisition of this Van Gogh, did not represent his wealth. They knew he was wealthy. He lived in their neighborhood. They knew that. It represented something else. It represented, of course, we can say his taste, but surely you people understand what it represents is his internal structure, his mind. That his mind is in such a condition, it is turned in such a way that he could walk through an art dealer's. And he suddenly saw the Van Gogh and went, I've got to have it. I'll have it whatever the cost. That's what it represented. So now consider each person, each sane, ordinary person standing in front. I know I'm being metaphorical, but standing in front of this acquisition. So a Van Gogh, how about a painting of you? Well, as you imagine yourself to be, of course. But this painting of you. I mean, so far it's fair enough. This painting of you, it's like everyone's ego, everyone's the personality that they present to the world. But here you stand in front of this thing, and unbeknownst to you, it's a forgery. It's a fraud. The situation in ordinary life, of course, is the same way as far as I took the story. As far as his neighbors, no one yet has gone up to the painting close enough or lacked the ability to actually go up and say, there's something about those brush strokes. Thus far, no, they're equally as bamboozled as the man is, the purchaser. Back to the metaphor of the human mind, which all of you seem here in person to have readily accepted or grasped onto as soon as I said the fake Van Gogh is the human mind. But it's not as necessarily as crude as it may at first sound, and it's not as begging of sarcasm, because this is not, when we talk about the mind now instead of a forged painting, we're not now talking about isolated, anomalistic cases in life. We're talking about everyone. Everyone is standing with or in front of the best work of art they can afford. Now, we're seriously into metaphors. Want him to stop afford. By afford, I mean in the broadest possible sense, because no one has gone out and paid for the mind they have. Well, God, tell me you didn't. You know what I mean. But what you're standing in front of, in the broadest possible sense of the term afford, you're standing there in front of the best mind that you could afford. You understand that? If you ask an ordinary person, how intelligent are you? How smart do you rate yourself? How much do you actually comprehend about the nature of life? And if they go, well, I'd say about average. And you go, well, geez, does that bother you? I mean, that you don't really understand what's going on in life? And the person goes, well, and no matter what they tell you, if you put it, not as an attack to make them defensive, but if you just ask their feeling about it, their feeling is, they'll describe to you, and what they'll describe is that they have done the best they could afford. You understand? That is, well, I never did get my master's degree. In fact, I started off, I was going to major in philosophy, and then my father died, and my mother had to sell the business because she couldn't run it, so I had to drop out of school for a while, and even when I went back, I had to forget philosophy. I had to go back and get my BS. I had to go back to business school. So a person normally describes, if they were asked in an objective way, that this painting, this representation of them, is actually the best they could afford, which is to say they bought a $12 million Van Gogh, in a sense. And people can say, if somebody was following this, a fairly ordinary person was following this changing of cowboy motor scooters in the middle of the river back and forth, that you'd understand that in a sense everybody is staying in front of the best one that they could afford, even though if they're asked, everyone will sort of shrug off, beg off that they could have done better had circumstances been different. But what they're describing is that they bought the best they could afford, given all conditions, which is what my man did. He looked around and bought, even though he might have had more money, $12 million is still a lot of money for a $50 piece of canvas. But when the dealer assured him, no one has anything like it, this will satisfy your needs. I mean, when the guy told me, he said, listen, I want a painting, just between you and me. I got the bread, I got the bucks here. I want something that's going to impress people. And so the dealer says, all right, here it is. A Van Gogh that no one that I know personally has ever even seen in person. It's just been rumored, and I've got it. So you understand, the man bought the best that he could afford. In his case, it wasn't just money because he could have paid more, but he bought the best he could afford. That is, he bought the best as far as he knew was the best. That was all he could afford. He had no more understanding. He had no more knowledge of the art world, and that was all he could afford. He asked the dealer, he said, are you sure nobody's seen this? And the dealer, of course, knowing it was a forgery to begin with, said, you have my word. None of your friends have ever seen this Van Gogh. So that was all he could afford. In other words, he didn't know any better. So that was the price he paid. That was the top dollar, was taking that man's advice. So we have everyone, instead of a Van Gogh, they're staying in front of a painting. And to varying degrees, it does get the job done. Everyone in the world, of course, is not impressed with your mind. Well, I had to point out because everyone in the world, back to my story, would this man open up his mansion and let just the riffraff of life show up the next day and say, well, I want everyone to come see my Van Gogh for which I paid $12 million. And he just starts letting in the hoi polloi of life. I assure you that there will be many people who will pass by that and the little note saying, he paid $12 million for me, who will not be impressed. That was for all of you who immediately laughed when I said that not everyone in life is impressed with your mind. That wasn't yet an attack of mankind, because there'd be plenty of people, back the other side of the metaphor, plenty of people would see that painting, not knowing it was a fraud, just knowing what I described that the man and his guest originally knew on opening night. They just see it, and somebody there, a butler, a tour guide, says, the master paid $12 million for that. There would be many people go by and see that, look up at, look back down, says $12 million, look up again, and not be impressed at all. Not at all. So it does not mean that the painting in front of which you stand impresses everyone. But life is arranged in such a way, please note. But back to my story, he only had people come in who, as it turns out, were impressed. Am I correct? He did not invite the chauffeur down the street. He did not invite the man selling papers on the corner down the street. He did not invite his gardener. He invited people. Now forget whether he knew that for a fact. Of course, if you ask him, he'd say, well, yeah, I knew that I assumed they would. But he only ended up inviting people to gather around him in the painting who were impressed. Likewise, when you find an ordinary man, and we're talking about his mind instead of a painting, you will find him normal. It's known as his circle of friends. You'll notice that he ends up some way, some miraculous way. He ends up surrounded, him and his painting, his Van Gogh, your mind, that he ends up with his friends that are fairly impressed. And if you don't like impressed, at least they don't laugh. At least they don't point at his Van Gogh and say, you paid $12 million for that thing? They don't do that. And of course, we're talking about minds now instead of paintings. You also understand, if it's an ordinary person staying around his house, around his kitchen on the weekend, and 8 or 10 of his buddies or the couples in the neighborhood, from the bowling league, they're staying around the backyard or somewhere, and each person has their painting behind them, their Van Gogh. And so one person stands for a while and he goes, well, let me tell you what happened to me and the promotion I got or the wreck I had. And so that's yours. And his friends are duly impressed. That is, they do not look at his Van Gogh and laugh. And so he gets through. You understand this go. And it's the next person. The next person says, well, speaking about Rex, let me tell you what almost happened to me. And so then everyone turns and you look at their painting. If they're your friends, and when he gets through, you don't go, you paid $12 million for that kind of story? You paid $12 million? That's the best mind you could afford to come up with crap like that? No. If somebody does that, I mean, they're going to be disinvited. That's going to be somebody wandered in off the street. That's what friends are for. That's what the birds of a feather being drawn into the correct herd. Or it's sheep of a woolly are drawn together. All right. May I redirect your attention one more time to the question. Go back and picture now the scene. The man who paid this $12 million for something that is a fraud. Except there he stands. And he has achieved what he was after, which let's agree, let's not argue the fact that right now, if he was asked, he feels as though this is the high point of my life. Making my first million, making my first billion. Nothing has ever approached the thing I have right now. The whole thing of turning around and seeing these people that he so long admired, from whom he seemed so cut off. And now they were suddenly, it was like just instantly, something happened when he gave the little preface to what he was going to unveil, and he dropped it, and there was a Van Gogh that no one had ever seen. And his whole life seemed to change. His whole life being now his desire to be accepted by a new part of the herd, or by a new flock. And they suddenly did it, but on the basis of a fraud, of which he was not even an active part. He was not even knowledgeable of the fraud. The fraud worked. The question is it a fraud? What's it going to matter? What if somebody does one day stumble in? He has to insure it. An insurance company is not going to just on the phone. You know, you call up and say, I just bought a $12 million painting and I'd like to insure it for, let's say, $15 million, just in case of inflation. I assume you people know that any insurance company, unless it's run by Daffy Duck, is probably going to want someone to do two things. One is to actually look that there is a painting, which again, when you're not dealing with intrinsic value, but I assume everyone knows if you go to insure your house, they want to send somebody out to just make sure you got a house. I mean, you get an address and say, well, and they charge so much for the square footage, and so it sounds all reasonable. And you say, well, it's a 10,000 square foot house, and I want to insure it for $2 million because it's at least worth that. They'd like to come out and make sure the address that you gave them is not a vacant lot, to where you get the policy and you call them up 2 weeks later and say, you'll never believe it. A tornado came through here and took out everything, including the foundation. I'm ruined. Send me my $2 million. They want to see that there's actually something that they're insuring that actually exists. All right. With a painting, though, there's two things. They want to know it exists, but plus, they know, if they got any sense, they know that no painting, a piece of canvas, they say, you're talking about a painting, like a thing on canvas hanging on the wall, and he goes, yeah. And they say, you paid $12 million. He says, yeah. They said, do you mind if we send over somebody to look at it? Because they know that there's no way that it has an intrinsic value of $12 million or 15. And so all insurance companies that deal it such as that, they will either have on call an expert or they will freelance one, and a man will come out, and assuming that he does qualify as an expert, it would take him, there would be no great difficulty that he looks around and he will say, sir, I've got some bad news for you. This is not a real Van Gogh. All right, what if that happened? And there the man stood. And, are you serious? The man said, I give you my word. I am an expert, blah, blah, blah. And so he shakes his hand and leaves, and there stands our billionaire. What would he do? What would be necessary? What damage had been done? We'll assume that the insurer has no reason to go out. He doesn't run the same circle. So the man's standing there realizing, my neighbors may never find this out. I mean, if I don't tell them, how will they ever know? They were here up close the other night, and not a one of them said a word. So there he stands, knowing he has a fraud, and yet knowing that it gets the job done. Does it sound any more like the human mind? I should be now a bit more specific in my question. Does it sound a bit more like the human mind of a person a little more conscious? How's that? That you realize somewhere along the way, I've got this thing, I've got a painting like everyone else. I've stumbled around through life. I've done all right. I'm just at the average level. And I realize, though, the thing that's gotten me by, it's not my strength, it's not my good looks, it's not my wealth. It seems to be what most people call their personality. You know, all kinds of descriptions of it, your ability to network, your charm, your entrepreneurial spirit. But it all has to do with this in here. But to realize, somewhere along the way, you can't really get an expert. Of course, I've been sort of playing that role for years, except I just can't come right out and say, by the way, that's a fake. That's not a real Picasso you got here. What good is that going to do? So a man has to finally realize, he's got to realize, this thing is not real. I know I paid good money. I paid as much as I could afford up to this point because I thought I had been nourishing my mind. I have read like a damn horny beaver for 20 years. I listen to the news. I ponder things. I write letters to the editor. I discuss things with my pals and my associates. And yet one day, it kind of creeps up on you. And one day a man looks around. Well, he's looked around a bunch of times, let's put it. But one day he looked and he just knows. He does not need an expert called in. He realizes this thing is a fraud. It is simply not what I have taken it to be, lo, these many years. So there you stand. It has, from all ordinary views, it is what has held you not only in good stead, but got you the same way as my man that worked his way up to bought the Van Gogh. It seems as though your mind is not only, stood you in reasonably good stead, but it's only through your mind that you have made whatever progress you've made thus far. Again, it's not through your strength. That doesn't mean anything anymore except in the world of athletics. And it's not your good looks, which doesn't mean anything unless you're a whore or a model. Well, never mind. I just heard somebody say that they're always open to a change of profession, but never mind. But that you realize that this thing is a fraud. I now know it, saith a man to himself. I now know it, and yet it got me this far. And of course, when you realize yours is a fraud, when you actually see it, then there's no longer any speculation. There's not another step. And there's the momentary lag is like that you instantaneously realize everybody's. You may have said such as this before in words, but the day you look around and there's no longer any doubt. You can no longer put up with the pretext. You look at it, you look at the brush strokes, you look at everything that is represented, and you look at it and it suddenly flashes. Huge neon, fraud, 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 and you realize I've been took. But instantaneously you also realize you being took is somewhat of an overstatement, somewhat of a egocentric overstatement, because you suddenly, instantaneously realize everyone's painting is a fraud. So you're in no worse position. You're not superior to them. You just suddenly realize it, and they don't. You're like my maid's boyfriend who peeked out of the kitchen, and he went, well, goddamn, I'm the one that painted that. He knew for a fact it's a fraud. That's how you know. You know it's a fraud, but you don't in no way feel superior because you have been defrauded. You have been the victim of a hoax as much as everyone else on this planet. Now back to the question I gave you to my man and his situation there, getting what he wanted, and it being a fraud and him not knowing, and me saying, what difference does it make? Now back to the person and the human mind, even if it is a fraud. What difference does it make? Think about it. If you get to the point and you realize this is a fraud, there's no doubt, and you also realize everyone else's, every painting hanging behind everyone, this self-portrait that they believe was painted by Gaines or Rembrandt, is a fraud. They're all a fraud. They're all knockoffs. Then you're left with this question, I'm believing it with you. What difference does it make? That sounds like too much of a rhetorical question. Let me redo it. What difference does it make? Isn't that delightful? Because I assume that you can put together the first story and realize, I hate to give an answer, but just to make a point, you do understand that as far as I took the scene, which was not playing with reality and I was not being disingenuous in my scenario, you do understand that as far as I painted this picture with the man and his painting, it being a fraud makes no difference. I mean, stand aside and look at the scene of him standing there and all of these people whose approval and acceptance he sought now they're giving it to him. He is delighted. If right now, if you ask him, was that a good buy? He would just laugh. That was the best $12 million I will ever spend. And yet we know, we're outside the scene, we're the boyfriend, they're in the kitchen looking outside, peeking, and we realize this whole thing is based on a fraud. It's not theory. He painted it. He knows what it is. So it's not in question, and yet there he stands in the kitchen. Look at that as being sort of an objective view of yourself, you of life. You're looking out there in the main ballroom, there in the big fireplace, this huge mansion, this painting that he paid $12 million for, and you look at it and you see what's going on, and you know it's based upon, the whole thing is built on a fraud. If he suddenly came out there and said, this is a fraud, I painted it, this whole scene would what? Absolutely collapse. That'd be the end of that man and his social climbing. That'd be the end of him probably in life. And yet there you stand knowing it's a fraud. They don't know it. And so the question, what difference does it make? As long as they don't know it, none. Do you see why this sort of thing, this kind of activity, the so-called mystical transcendental work has always been so popular? Yeah, I see why. Because from one view, it doesn't make any difference to anybody. Or as I slipped in and used item that says, you know, if ordinary people, if most people just sit still, they know damn well what a mystic's talking about. Which is why they won't sit still. Anybody get anything? All right, I'll stretch the scene one more time, last time. If suddenly, in the middle of all this, you're the guy who paid the $12 million, and you look up, and here comes your maid out, or right there in the kitchen door, you happen to see her, and her boyfriend, you've seen him around, and he's kind of pushing her out of the way, and he's coming in, pointing his finger, and he's saying something. He's way off, but he's coming, and maybe something. You remember she mentioned one time he was a painter or something. But anyway, something hits you. This is bad news. He's coming in, he said, hey, I got to tell you something. He's pointing at the painting, and you suddenly realize, wait a minute, I don't like this. That's people not sitting still to hear such as this. They don't want to hear it. It's not going to, all it is about a fraud. But the fraud is meaningless to them. In fact, an ordinary person, this man doesn't want to hear. If he sees this guy coming out and he remembers, just suddenly hits him, his girlfriend told him, the billionaire, that her boyfriend does painting all the time. And suddenly, maybe he just read yesterday about them busting up a fraud, an art fraud ring over in Milan. And suddenly it all comes together, and you don't know why, but he just suddenly realizes, no, somebody shut I don't want to hear this. You just know something bad is about to happen. But understand, the only thing bad about to happen was the truth was about to come out if he knew it. The guy's simply going to say, well, you bought a fraud. But as long as nobody knows it's a fraud, there he is and everything's fine. God, that sounds a lot like the mine. Jesus. I guess everybody's sorry I brought it up now. You and your damn those stories.